The first discussion topic on today's Peace and Prosperity is U.S. President Donald Trump's intention behind an apparent shift in his foreign policy and its ramifications on global security. Turkey launched a military offensive on October 9th to oust the Kurds from northeastern Syria. Following a White House statement that U.S. forces would not be involved in the Turkish operation, the U.S. pulled out its troops from the area on October 13th. The decision was met with criticism that the U.S. has abandoned the Kurds who helped the U.S. defeat ISIS. When asked whether allowing Turkey's offensive against the Kurds could impact the U.S. ability to forge future alliances, President Trump said, "Alliances are very easy." How will Trump's latest foreign policy change and his America First doctrine affect world diplomacy and existing U.S. alliances? Today's second discussion topic is the creative ideas that the U.S. supposedly brought to the Stockholm talks and the change in North Korea's demands since the Hanoi summit. After the breakdown of working-level talks in Stockholm, North Korea criticized joint drills conducted by South Korea and the U.S. and slammed South Korea's decision to purchase U.S. weapons. With North Korea's foreign ministry taking the lead in nuclear diplomacy, the regime appears to have upped its demands since Hanoi, asking for security assurances on top of sanctions relief. How will Washington respond to Pyongyang's new demands? To shed light on these latest developments, our host, Bong Young-shi, research fellow at Yonsei University's Institute for North Korean Studies, is joined by Ju Jae-woo, professor of political science and diplomacy at Kyunghee University. To broaden the perspective, we also connect with guest experts on Skype, including Ankit Panda, senior editor at The Diplomat magazine, and Andrew Yeo, associate professor of politics at the Catholic University of America.
Hello and welcome to our program. U.S. foreign policy towards Syria and towards Kurds, who helped Washington defeat ISIS, has seen a dramatic shift lately. U.S. President Donald Trump continues to tout nuclear talks with North Korea as his major foreign policy achievement, yet it remains to be seen where his personal diplomacy with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will lead to. What are the implications of changing U.S. foreign policy on denuclearization talks? Joining with us here to go in-depth analysis about North Korea is Professor Ju Jae-woo from Kyunghee University. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you about the conspicuous silence of President Donald Trump since the breakdown of the North Korea-U.S. working-level talks in Stockholm. What accounts for his silence?
Yes, that's pretty strange, right?
Right.
Considering how talkative and vociferous he is.
No Twitter message
That's
at
right.
all.
That's right. So I guess it implies that probably he's not too satisfied with the outcomes of the talks. Probably the results weren't too satisfying. There's no substance to it. And I think the talk only went on for a day, right? And there was probably short hours of meetings, and probably he's not too satisfied with the outcomes, and as well as of now, he's very much preoccupied with other diplomatic issues, like just like you pointed out, Syria, Kurds, and Iran, Saudi Arabia, as well as Ukraine issue, because Ukraine issue is now pointing against him, pointing towards him. That,
right. It may lead to the impeachment.
That's
inquiry,
right. So whether impeachment is feasible or possible, regardless of that, but I'm sure that's acting as a distraction factor here.
What do you think of the possibility of the impeachment inquiry actually to be materialized?
Well, the Democrats would have to come up with some really solid evidence as to whether how much Donald Trump has been involved with this.
So too early to say anything?
That's right. So I guess the case is still under investigation.
Right. Now we'll hear observations from the U.S. on this matter. Joining us on the line is Ankit Panda, senior editor at The Diplomat, an online magazine on Asia-Pacific affairs. Hello?
Thanks so much for having me today. It's great to be here.
Right. Welcome to Peace and Prosperity. U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. forces from Syria and Turkey's subsequent military offensive in the Kurdish stronghold in northeastern Syria has sparked outrage among the Kurds as well as among Americans who helped the U.S. defeat ISIS. How is the American public reacting to these developments in general?
So the American public is definitely not reacting in a unified way. First of all, foreign policy in general is not something that many Americans think about day to day. With the issue of what's happening right now in northern Turkey and President Trump's dramatic turn away from his own counter-ISIS campaign, I think what I've observed is that things are breaking down primarily along the typical partisan lines where critics of President Trump are seeing this as just another example of how reckless his decision-making can be, whereas his supporters see this as a masterstroke of strategy, pulling American troops back from really where they shouldn't be. But otherwise, I think if you look at general support for the move, I think we might see this actually spiral out of control for the president. I think this is one of the more dangerous moves that he's made since the prospect of an impeachment inquiry became more apparent. And I suspect we might see more along these lines going forward, unfortunately.
The withdrawal of the U.S. troops from Syria, it was one of President Trump's campaign promises, platforms. Do you think this is an example of him really going forward with his America First doctrine?
So again, I think the American public, if you look at public opinion polling on support for things like alliances, free trade, the American public is actually not generally in favor of the American First agenda. Of course, President Trump won enough electoral votes to become president, and yes, he did make that campaign promise, and he emphasized it even at his inaugural address, and it's been a part of his strategy, even though his administration has put out several strategy documents that say something quite different, right? The National Defense Strategy, National Security Strategy, all emphasize commitments to allies, emphasize a robust role for the United States in the Middle East. Apart from the Syria thing, if you look at his policy, for example, in the Persian Gulf with Iran, I think it's very much not in line with that America First message. But yes, I think the president has been trying to protect and defend his decision in terms of his campaign promises. He has pointed to the fact that he is ending wars in the Middle East. So he says that other American presidents have been unable to. Of course, I think he'll be able to complete a tactical retreat from Syria. Perhaps it's easy to pull troops out, but as we know with the history of U.S. involvement in the Middle East, it's very difficult for the United States to truly extricate itself in a strategic sense. So even if troops do withdraw from Syria, I suspect that won't be the last that we'll hear of the United States and Syria anytime soon.
Right, Mr. Panda, thank you so much for your sharing your analysis with us today.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
So, Professor Chu,
Yes.
what do you think of Mr. Panda's analysis?
Yes, I think on 2 points I have to agree with him. He said on the Turkey issue and Kurds and Syria, I think there's definitely a strong general support to Donald Trump's move. But I think he should have been more specific about it. I think it's the rather Republicans that are really supportive, while the Democrats are, arguing that his decision was reckless, just like he pointed out. And the second point is probably for next year's re-election, I don't think foreign policy or any achievements in foreign policy is not going to be a positive account for his re-election cause. And for that matter, so I don't think we can expect too much from probably, unlike our hopes, that the United States is going to make more advanced efforts to negotiate with North Korea for any kind of outcomes on the denuclearization issues.
So there is a chance that the nuclear talks between Washington and Pyongyang may be stuck?
Yeah, maybe stalled.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's stay on discussing the externalities of North Korea's denuclearization issue.
Yes.
Washington is obviously mired with a lot of other foreign policy crises,
That's
like
right.
Syrian withdrawal and the dispute between Iran and Saudi Arabia, to just name a couple
Yes.
of the examples. How do you think these events affect the North Korean issue in terms of a priority for the Trump administration to deal with?
I think domestic politics is going to be really playing a key role here because if, like I said, Republicans are satisfied with the outcomes of the decisions. So Republicans set aside, now it's going to be all up to the Democrats. Democrats are, they're characterizing his decision as reckless, just like Mr. Pana pointed out. So from now on, how Democrats are going to view his decision and how they're going to relate these decisions in terms of his foreign policy stance and his engagement with Ukraine and so forth. So whether it's going to spiral southward, we'll have to see. But if it doesn't, if it goes up northward and plays a positive role, positive factor to his foreign policy outcomes, then let it be. So then he'll be fine.
Okay, considering all these points that you just mentioned,
Yes.
do you think he will continue to engage with North Korea through diplomatic talks?
Yes, that's what he's been saying. He's been telling the public that he's willing to, and he's more than willing to engage and maintain relationship with North Korea. And I take his words by face value. We've seen it with Begin's recent talk with Pyongyang, and I think despite, within the next 2 weeks, there's supposed to be another round of working level talks, but it's not happening. But I don't think he's totally giving up on hopes on that. So we'll have to see, but I don't think anything feasible can be happened within this year. Probably it might hand over to next year's.
All right. Let's turn the table around and discuss how North Koreans are viewing all this. I mean, how do these events or the political conditions of the Trump administration at home would make North Koreans think of the next moves?
Yes, I think this is where it gets strange because I think North Korea was ready for some concrete and substantive talks with Washington, and I think that expectation was manifested in some personal changes. And these people are supposed to be more pragmatic and flexible. And
but they walked away from Stockholm.
That's right. Not only they walked away from the Stockholm, right? But you hear some of the rhetoric coming out in recent times.
Condemning Washington.
Yeah, that's right. Very critical, very harsh, very aggressive. So unlike their personal characters that are defined and reported in the media, they seem to be very, very aggressive here. So I think North Korea, what we can take is, I think they're ready to talk, but it's a matter of whether the United States is willing to make its own move at this stage.
All right. Okay. Let's go to U.S. experts' take on President Trump's North Korea policy. We have on the line Andrew Yeo, Associate Professor of Politics at the Catholic University of America. Welcome to our program, Professor Yeo.
Thanks for having me on your program.
President Trump has touted his nuclear negotiations with North Korea as the biggest foreign policy success. Do you think he may be so desperate for a policy win for re-election that he's likely to make a bad deal with North Korea?
He certainly wants to have some kind of win, but I don't think he'll necessarily make a bad deal. He was in the last meeting with Kim Jong-un in the Hanoi summit. I mean, he was willing not to make a bad deal, and so there's no reason why we would expect that he's so desperate that he would move forward with one. I think the bigger question is really whether he gets that opportunity or not.
Right, very interesting, because there is a substantial concern that Trump may be willing to make a bad deal with North Korea. A second question is that after the much anticipated working level talks in Stockholm, Sweden, broke down, some in Washington claim President Trump's diplomacy centering on his personal ties is facing a test. Skeptics even say there is no hope for North Korea's denuclearization anymore. What do you make of this?
So there's always been skeptics. Even before the Stockholm meeting, of course, the skeptics were saying there's never going to be any deal with denuclearization. So I don't think this changes the game at all. I mean, my own perspective is that there's always a possibility. It's a very slim chance, but it doesn't mean that it's completely eroded. What I am finding, though, is that there are some folks in Washington who perhaps were a bit more optimistic before, and now they're even saying maybe we should move away from denuclearization and just think about arms control. So that is one, I think, shift reality that we're seeing in the U.S. But in terms of the denuclearization, I mean, there's skeptics before and there's skeptics now, and I still think that you can't really predict the future. So there's still that slim possibility that we could have denuclearization, just not anytime in the near future.
Yes, Professor Yeo,
Okay.
following the Stockholm talks, within the next 2 weeks, there's supposed to be another round of working level talks between the United States and North Korea. Do you think it's going to happen within the year?
I think that window has almost effectively closed. I mean, right now, Trump is going through the impeachment scandal. We're hearing about this crisis unfolding in northern Syria, and so it doesn't look like there's much space for room on North Korea, at least for a big meeting. There could be some working level meetings that continue, but in terms of a Trump-Kim summit, I find that the chances of that being really slim.
All right, Professor Yeo, thank you so much for joining our program.
Thank you.
Professor Chu,
Yes.
let's stay on Professor Yeo's last remark that he seems like he said the window is closed and
Yes.
there's not much space available to President Trump to consider third summit meeting with the Chairman Kim Jong-un.
Yes.
That's contrary to the expectation expressed by some South Korean government officials and
That's
experts,
right.
including the former Minister of Unification.
Yes.
What's your position?
My take is I don't think it's going to happen. Just like
Not
Professor-
before the end of this
Not
year.
before the end of this year. I think we're running out of time, and obviously, coming next month, we all know that, there's going to be Thanksgiving in the United States, as well as Trump administration. The last agenda on their foreign policy is going to be attending APEC.
APEC.
Yes, Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, which is going to be held in Chile. So I think just like Professor Yeo and Mr. Panda pointed out, I think if you look at it from a Washington perspective, he's very much preoccupied with domestic political issues and economic issues. So former, Minister of Unification of South Korea, I think he's extending his wishful thinking to be known at this stage.
All right, then let's just assume that it is not so likely
Yes.
that the third summit meeting between Washington and Pyongyang
Yes.
is going to take place anytime soon. Then what about Chairman Kim Jong coming to Busan, in
Busan.
November?
Yes, I'm not as optimistic as some other foreign affairs observers in South Korea are, because for one thing, for North Korean leaders in the past and present, for them to move and take the initiative of such a bold move, then there has to be some kind of compromise or some kind of relationship improvement signals between the United States and North Korea.
Right.
Unless there's anything of such, then I don't think it's going to happen. So at least, at this stage, we can see that there's not much going on between Washington and Pyongyang. and
What
December
about between
22nd.
Seoul and Pyongyang?
Seoul and Pyongyang, so that's what I said, for North Korea to make any move, the United States has to be the facilitator.
Right.
Then they will make a move to South Korea.
All right. It remains largely unclear when working level talks between North Korea and the United States will resume, or whether a third Kim-Trump summit meeting will take place within this year. We can only guess how things will play out by looking at the officials from Pyongyang and Washington involved in the latest talks in Stockholm. One thing that's noteworthy is that North Korea's foreign ministry took the lead in the negotiations. Here's more on the story.
North Korea's point man on working-level negotiations with the U.S. in Stockholm was Kim Myung-gil, roving ambassador at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Stockholm talks was the first where the North's foreign ministry took the lead in nuclear diplomacy with the U.S., which began last year. Initially, North Korea's United Front Department led denuclearization talks with the Trump administration. The working-level talks in Stockholm marked the foreign ministry's return to its traditional role as a body in charge of negotiations. The United Front Department is an intel agency within the Workers' Party of Korea in charge of inter-Korean exchanges and propaganda operations against the South. There was a dramatic thawing of inter-Korean relations after United Front Department Director Kim Young-chul came to the South as the North's envoy to the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018. The department was tasked with talks with the U.S. afterwards. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is an administrative department handling foreign policy and relations. It had led multiple nuclear negotiations since 1989, when North Korea's nuclear program first emerged as a global issue. At the forefront of North Korea's nuclear diplomacy are three senior officials from the Foreign Ministry, namely Roving Ambassador and Chief Nuclear Negotiator Kim Myung-gil, Foreign Minister Lee Yong-ho, and First Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee. They use tough rhetoric to show their discontent with Washington or Seoul.
명백히 하건대 지금과 같은 미국의 강도적 입장은 사태를 분명 위험하게 만들 것입니다.
So what led to the return of Foreign Ministry to nuclear negotiations? Watchers say the United Front Department could have been sidelined to take responsibility for the failure of the Hanoi summit in February. Prior to the Hanoi summit, North Korea and the U.S. had agreed to the general principle of working towards complete denuclearization in exchange for security guarantees. But the United Front Department that prepared the Hanoi talks proposed a partial lifting of sanctions at the negotiating table. The Foreign Ministry, which replaced the United Front Department following the breakdown in Hanoi, is now pressuring the U.S. with a new demand for security guarantees.
우리가 이미 미국 측에 어떤 계산법이 필요한가를 명백히 설명하고 시간도 충분히 주었음에도 불구하고 미국이 빈손으로 협상에 나온 것은 결국 문제를 풀 생각이 없다는 것을 보여줍니다.
The U.S. said it brought creative ideas and had good discussions in Stockholm, but North Korea blamed the U.S. for coming empty-handed for the talks. It remains to be seen what role the North's foreign ministry and its three key officials will play in future nuclear dialogue.
So, Professor Chuje, we watched the VCR about the rise of the foreign ministry
That's right.
taking more charge in negotiations on denuclearization with the United States.
Yes.
What do you think of this phenomenon?
Yes, my take is
Positive, negative?
negative in a way. I'm
Negative.
but rather disappointed, because in the past, you know, there was a unification frontier that took the lead.
right.
Yes, the lead in negotiation with the United States, and that united front is a party apparatus, so it has more authority to negotiate and make decision. It has more decision power. Decision-making power. So in a sense, they can make an impromptu and spontaneous decision while the negotiation is going on with the United States. But now what it means that the foreign ministry is taking over in negotiation with the United States is that it has been somewhat degraded in a party and government relationship. So here, we can go back to the 90s, when Kang Seok-ju, the first Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of North Korea, was in charge of negotiation with Christopher Hill and so some other U.S. representatives. He couldn't make an instant and spontaneous decision at the negotiation table. He would always have to go back to Pyongyang or cable them, or at least get their response and direction from Pyongyang before he can, renegotiate, resume the talks with the United States. So it's going to stall talks in between, and there's going to be some pause and layoffs and so forth. So it's going to be a much slower progress coming forward.
But there are some other opinions that
Yes.
foreign ministry officials must be more knowledgeable about, technological aspects of denuclearization.
Yes, definitely, for sure.
So that's a plus.
Yeah, yes, but like I said, if you don't have decision-making power at the negotiation table, and you would have to always pause, call for a timeout, and go back and
Look back over
get
your shoulders for
Exactly. So that's the thing with China also. But if you look at the six-party talks, that's why the representative of the Chinese side in the six-party talks was not from the government, was not from the foreign ministry. Mr. Dai Bing-kuo was representative of the Chinese CCP.
There is a news coming from Washington that
Yes.
the appointment of the United States negotiation team, Mr. Stephen Biegun, would be promoted to be the next Deputy Secretary of State.
Yes, that's right.
How will that affect the negotiation between two sides?
I think it's going to be it's going to have a positive effect on the United States side. So I guess what the move implies is that Mr. Trump wants to give more authority to Mr. Biegun, and he doesn't have to always check with Washington or the desk in the State Department, but rather with that status, he can make his own decision at the negotiating table whenever it's feasible. Yeah.
And the North Korean team, especially the Ambassador Kim Myung-gil, criticized the United States
Yes.
coming to the negotiation table with empty hands, no creative ideas.
Yes.
Were there any creative ideas proposed by the U.S. team on the table?
No, I don't think there was anything.
Nothing creative?
No, nothing creative, nothing substantive coming from Washington at all. I think Mr. Biegun wanted to hear what North Korea really wanted, because at the time the ball was in Pyongyang's court. Now, I think the reason why North Korean representatives walked away from the talks was because they came up with this, their own ideas as to how the incremental procedure should take, what the initiative should be, and what kind of reciprocal procedures should follow. But I think Mr. Biegun remained mum. Yeah, that's right. He didn't make any response. I think the sole and intended purpose of his presence was to hear what North Korea wanted to come, because the ball was in Pyongyang's court. Now the ball is in Washington's court.
I see. This is my last question.
Yes.
It's very interesting. Both Chairman Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump
Yes.
said that they are in no hurry, right? In April, Kim Jong-un said that we'll wait until the end of this year.
That's right.
Until United States comes up with creative ideas.
That's right.
Donald Trump also said that we are in no hurry. We are happy as long as North Korea does not conduct another nuclear or missile test.
Yes. Yes.
Which side does time favor? And who's bluffing?
I think they're both bluffing. They're both bluffing. I think time is being really fair to both sides, because we've seen Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un meeting 3 times so far, and every time, if we recollect a little bit, they don't seem to be in a hurry, but at the same time they seem to be in constant engagement and communication. So whether it's an impromptu meeting, just like in Panmunjom last June, or very well organized and very, very well advanced planned meetings like in Singapore, I think they know how to deal with each other. Okay. So I think the time is on playing fair enough for both sides.
Okay. All right, Professor Cho Jae-woo, thank you so much for coming to the studio and share your insight as always.
Thank you, as always.
We'll keep a close eye on President Trump's changing foreign policy, as it could have major ramifications for both denuclearization of North Korea and the negotiations and the world diplomacy. And that's all we have for you today. Thanks for watching.